Hey guys, I'm Simon and this is an architecture tour of Deus Ex Human Revolution. In the last video we just went through the Seraph Industries headquarters, and now we stepped out the door out into the streets of Detroit. Now, there's a number of conflicting issues with trying to build a city in a game, right? So, first up, you want to have a relatively convincing street pattern, in the sense that, a city has a certain form and you want the game to be realistic enough, or you need to look realistic enough for the players to believe that it's a city. And on the other hand, you have to consider gameplay. Playing a game that's set in a city is quite different from using a real city, or how people usually use real cities. And then thirdly, you have the issue of, you have technical issues of polygon counts and video memory and all that, and so you can't have really huge complex scenes without, sacrificing the quality of how it looks and all that. So, some things to consider as we walk around the city of Detroit. I guess it'd be good to start off looking at the map. So we are here. That's the Seraph headquarters. Now, maybe... well, the most obvious thing to me, straight away, is that this looks nothing like a real city. Like, the buildings are too big in comparison to the streets. The streets are all... look at that street pattern. All the streets are on funny angles and there's no straight lines and all that. Everything's... it's like a maze, and it's a lot like what you would expect to find in a computer game level design, and not what you would find in a real city. And well, obviously we are playing a game, and so this is a computer game level and not a real city. So I guess that's how it is. Obviously this area is a little bit more complicated than the one we were in before, where there was just basically one lobby area, one helipad, and then the boss's office. So here we have a few more. We have the Seraph Plaza, I guess, limb clinic, we have the apartments here, we have a tram station here, police station here, our own apartment here, and derelict row up here. So there's many more areas, but still the street pattern is fairly linear. I guess it's not obvious here, but there's one line going there, then going off. You have two paths, and then they join back up here, and so the street pattern's not too complicated, but we'll get to that in a bit. First off, the Seraph Plaza. Now, I don't know about you, but this main entrance doesn't look very impressive from this angle. And you might remember in the last video I talked about the issue of concept art, and because they are usually like 2D drawings or 2D paintings, you would get really good looking views from one angle, but then when you translate the concept art into 3D, then unless you draw a building from every conceivable angle, not every view of your architecture will look great, will look as great as the concept art, because the concept art only considers a single view. And before I started recording this video, I was walking around this plaza trying to find what might have been the concept art shot, and I think somewhere around here, maybe like that. Now, how do I find this? Well, first of all, Seraph. See that SARF there? It's written on that side of the building, so it's obviously meant to be seen from the front. I mean, imagine if it was like this. You wouldn't have the concept artist painting that and then putting the Seraph there, and you can't read it, right? So you would imagine that if there was one picture that was used on which this thing was based, it would have been from this angle. Now this sculpture is quite important. I mean, the symbolism is obviously the wing well, not obvious if you haven't played the game, but if you have played the game, then the ideas of wings and Icarus and should I guess I'll talk about the myth. Icarus is a Greek myth if you don't know. It's about these two guys, father and son, Daedalus and Icarus. They built wings out of beeswax and feathers to escape a prison, I think it was. To escape something. So they built wings and then they flew away. But Icarus, the son, got a bit too excited and he flew too high. And he flew too close to the sun and the sun melted the wax. And so his wings fell off and he plunged into the ocean and died. And Daedalus kind of survived, but his son, he escaped, but his son died. And so the story about that, I guess, is the idea of transcending your limitations, flying off into the sky, transcending gravity, but then getting overconfident or getting carried away and finding yourself in trouble and then getting yourself killed in Icarus's case. So it talks about, it talks about transcendence, but also hubris, being too confident in your abilities. And the parallel in this story, of course, I don't know if you have played the game or not. If you haven't, this story is about augmentation and people replacing limbs and having implants put into them to increase their physical ability by replacing biological body parts with robotic body parts. And that's the parallel with building wings, and then obviously the dangers of out of control augmentation. People using it for all sorts of purposes, and the ethics behind that. And anyway, so that's a story. You should buy the game if you haven't. If you have, I don't know if you think too much about the story and theme. So that's the wing there. Anyway, we're back to this point. So, oh hi there. I don't think he's meant to be there, but yeah, I was thinking this is probably the best looking angle on this building, and you will notice that from here you can't see the front door. So whoever drew the artwork didn't have to draw the front door, but the guy who made the model had to make the front door, and the front door doesn't look anywhere near as impressive as, that view. And indeed, almost every other view of that building is not quite as impressive as that particular view. And I mean, it's, there's nothing wrong with making great concept art, and there's obviously nothing wrong with turning that great concept art into a fairly good looking computer game level, but it would have been better maybe if they drew a few more paintings of the building from different angles and gave every part of the building the same level of thought that they put into the main view of it. I mean, that's okay. It's not as good. Imagine if every single part of that building was as well considered as the particular angle that the concept art was painted from. That would have been it would have been better, right? But I guess it would also have been a lot more time consuming and more expensive and everything else. So yeah, and this will come through again and again in this game. And partly it's because the concept art is so good that when other parts of the architecture and the levels don't live up to the standard that's set by images like this, then it's noticeable. Alright, what's next? The next thing I want to talk about is that tram there, or that monorail. Now again, in the last video I talked about how there are things you can do to make the player look in certain directions. And I think this tram is one of them. I mean, it makes a noise and it moves. And you might notice that not many things move around here. There's no cars well, there's cars, but they don't drive along the streets. There's people, and the people are kind of interesting. You can talk to them and they'll tell you a bit of the backstory. So that's one of the only things in this whole level that moves. So that draws your attention. But the issue is, there's not too much to look at up there. And I think the only purpose that might serve is to lead the player into the monorail station, which of course then leads you to the next place you need to go. But I would think that maybe an opportunity is missed here to, you know, put some impressive stuff up there so that when the player watches the monorail, they would see other things as well. I guess what it does do is, at least, you know, if you're coming back out of the monorail station this way, then it might draw your attention upwards and then you see the Seraph Industries headquarters in the background, but I mean that's not too good because the rail is in the way. And I guess it's okay here, but anyway, I don't think this has been as well considered as it could have been, and certainly I can think of other things that might have been done to, well, you know, other ways to exploit the fact that this moving thing up there is going to draw the player's attention. But it's alright, it's quite good. And yeah, like most of the time when you're on the street, either in-game or in the real world, you'll be keeping your head down and looking at where you're going. And so, you know, you can make a really impressive Seraph Industries headquarters, but most people will be looking around here. They're looking at the cars. They might be looting the trash cans for loot. You know, they might be talking to people. And, you know, having this really tall building, it's not easy to make the players appreciate these things. And you really have to work to get them to look at the things that you've put so much effort into making. You know, like this building here, there's nothing to draw your attention to that, really. But if you look at it, there's quite cool architecture. I mean, it's not spectacular or particularly meaningful, but it's interesting, you know, this stuff. Anyway, we'll keep going along the street. We have a petrol station that's run down. There's a gun merchant in there. I think in this world, in this future world, they've run out of petrol, or they've run out of crude oil, peak oil and all that, and so I think these cars are meant to be electric or some other fuel that they use. I don't think anyone uses petrol anymore. The next building here is the limb clinic. The limb clinic is, well, in the game is where people will get augmentations. It's like a clinic for, it's a cross between a clinic and a robotics kind of a workshop. So if you kind of replace your arm with a robot arm, then you can come here and get it fixed if it's a problem or whatever it is. And I want to point out at this point that there's a architectural contrast between the old Detroit, which is this brick stuff, and then the new Detroit, which is the architecture. Here you can see all these fancy angles, all these diagonals, right? And it's all light and glass, whereas all this is brick and square, these triangles and quadrilaterals and fancy shapes, and that's all boring. And so there's a very clear contrast between the new stuff, the robotics and the augmentations, and the old stuff and the traditional stuff. And it's a recurring theme as well in this story, and this is, I guess, halfway in between the two. And I'll just kind of run back here and look at the Seraph Industries again. So that's new, it's all glass and funny angles. We can't really see it from here. But anyway, it's all light and funny angles, whereas the old stuff is brick. And I'm trying not to have too many spoilers and trying to stick to architecture, but if you talk to the people in the game, then everyone has an opinion about augmentation and whether they like it or not. And about how some people say, there's too much change too quickly, and some people just want to embrace the possibilities and all that. And so yeah, I really do appreciate how deep the game is. I mean, it's not too intellectual, but at least they give a good how do you say it? Like they really do take the time to address the themes and the ideas of the game. It's quite cerebral, if not too intellectual. So this street ends here, at least for the game. Here we have like a police barricade. I don't know what's going on here. Some people being questioned as a traffic jam, I guess. So again, trying to create a city in a game and suggesting that the city is much bigger than where you're actually walking. And the various tricks to do that. Over here is the Detroit Convention Center. We won't be going here for quite some time yet. But it's not a very grand entrance to a convention center, is it? I'm not sure about that. But let's not worry about that for now. What shall we do next? I guess we can come into the limb clinic. I mean, it's not very big, so I'll come in here. Just to show you the interior design of it. So it's all very fancy, as you can see. Very clean, with that marble. It's all very expensive. And all of these things are important. It's clean, expensive, futuristic. Mostly just expensive. And that's another thing too, like in the game, you know, they talk a lot about rich people being afford to augment themselves and make themselves more powerful in all sorts of different ways, whereas the poor people get left behind. So here we have, you know, these very clean counters. Are those lights in the floor? I think they are. All sorts of fancy lights up here. Completely unnecessary bits hanging off the ceiling just to show you how extravagant everything is. And then what is this? Faux antique furniture, is that like leather chairs? It's like electric candles. I think these are meant to be fluorescent tubes on like a candle stand. All very, very extravagant. And back here we have the operating theatres. The soundtrack's pretty good too. I mean, we're not here to talk about music, we're here to talk about architecture, but you can hear it going on in the background. The music's quite nice. So, you know, all sorts of robotics, cutting up your limbs from replacing them with these stronger, more powerful versions of your limbs. Very nice, isn't it? There's a lot of light, a lot of machinery, all very high tech, all very expensive. So you might want to keep this image in mind, and later on we can compare that with some of the other environments in Detroit and compare between the new Detroit as represented by the augmentation industry and the old Detroit, which is all the other people, I guess. Oh, and one last little detail. You might notice that every area that we can go into are raised on stairs. I mean, it seems like a minor thing, but I mean, I guess most people won't even notice it consciously, but see, the convention center we'll go into later. It's upstairs. The limb clinic here, up these stairs. Now all these other buildings we can't go into, they're all on ground level. So these doors are closed, you can't actually go into them. Well, I guess the exception is the petrol station. And there's actually stuff behind the petrol station that we can see on the map. There's actually apartments back there, but they're poor people's apartments, so they're not fancy rich people stuff. So the monorail station is up the stairs. And and Seraph Industries is up those stairs. So, you know, it's kind of subtle. It's kind of subtle, but you know, all the fancy rich people stuff is raised up on podiums, so they're higher up than all the common people on the ground. You know, it's just a little bit of symbolism. Subtle, but consistent, and I'm pretty sure that's quite deliberate. I mean, most people won't notice it, but it's there. Alright, I'm getting some frame rate issues. I'm gonna leave this video here, and this is only half of Detroit as in the game, so we've walked around this part. Actually, it's not even half, it's like a third of it. So in the next part we'll go through the monorail station and have a look at the police station, and maybe have a look at these other buildings around here. Just the outside, we won't, and afterwards I'll go into those buildings. Alright, I'll end this part here. Next up, we'll walk into the station. Thanks for watching, I hope you're enjoying them.